chapter 12. So as my father alluded to, I enjoy sports. Basically any sport that's played I enjoy. I coach soccer and tennis, and I played soccer, and I also ran track. Growing up in Ohio, football is kind of an institution in that state, so I grew up enjoying football as well. Enjoy hockey. So I enjoy all sorts of sports. So when the Bible mentions sports, I often get excited. Now, a lot of the sports we enjoy today around Bible times, I don't think they had ice rinks back then, so hockey is not alluded to in the Bible. But running, wrestling, and boxing are. I don't have any experience with wrestling or boxing, but I was a runner. So growing up, running was a little bit different. I went to Zanesville Christian School in Ohio, and we were part of the Buckeye Christian School Association, and they had one track meet a year. So it wasn't like we had a real track team where we had multiple meets like most schools do today. We just had one meet, which meant it was up to the athletes themselves to train themselves, which meant my dad was my track coach. So during the springtime when I got home from school, my dad would take me and my brother to the Crooksville High School gravel track. And I don't know how it was decided, but we were long distance runners. So we ran the mile and half mile. And my dad is not a trained track coach, so he just said, go run. And we ran, and it was also by the school seemed to have its own sewage treatment facility, which is located right beside the track. So I have a lot of memories and olfactory sense memories too from that training experience. But running is an interesting sport because it's not, in today's culture, running is not one of the high-profile sports. Every 4 years we get excited for the Olympics. And usually that's the short distance, so like we know Usain Bolt. Probably most other runners we don't really know, because today we have football, we have all these other sports that are seemingly more exciting. But running is an ancient sport, so I think people have been running since almost the beginning of time. You can read about even running in the Old Testament, when David or other men were fighting battles, they would have runners who would go back and forth to tell people the news. And I think competition is in human nature. So even though we have a whole sporting culture today, sports go back to the Olympic Games, other things, running is really in human nature. And this passage we're going to look at mentions running, and I think as we consider the new year coming, I think running is an excellent example of the human life. And I will make some comparisons to running in a race and how that compares to our human life. So in Hebrews chapter 12, we're going to begin with the first two verses. It says, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God." So as we look at this, first of all, in context, when we see, "Wherefore we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses," who are they? And some people use this verse, and I don't think we can argue about it. We don't really know what heaven is like. Some people say people in heaven are looking down, watching the people on earth, and that may be true. I think this really refers to this great cloud of witnesses, refers to Hebrews chapter 11. Because Hebrews chapter 11 is the great hall of faith where we go through many of the Old Testament heroes and what they accomplished through faith. And when you look at that passage, we are supposed to follow their example. So when it says great cloud of witnesses, these are witnesses of God's grace and God's goodness and those who went before us who showed faith. So it's not necessarily they're looking down watching us. That may be true. But we are following in the steps of, we are in a sense surrounded by people who have demonstrated faith and who through faith have accomplished great things. And so because of those who have gone before us and what they have accomplished, we then also should do the same thing. So what are we supposed to do because we are following their example? Let us lay aside every weight. So a weight can be a distraction. The next phrase mentions sin, so weight and sin are not necessarily the same thing. But a weight is a distraction or a burden. So if you go to a race or you watch runners, they do not wear a lot of equipment. They're not like football or hockey players. They don't have pads, helmets, other things like that. They want to lay everything aside. Usually every year I participate in a turkey trot 5K. And when you're lining up for the race, you kind of sense who the serious runners. And even though usually Maryland's not as cold as here, but usually on Thanksgiving morning it's pretty chilly out. If someone has like a hoodie, a hat, sweatpants on, you can look at them and think, I bet they're not a serious runner. Because they're going to be, if they're running 3 miles, they're going to be weighed down by all those things. The serious runners, even though it's cold out, they're wearing shorts, they're wearing maybe tank top or t-shirt. Even though it's cold out, they want to lay everything aside because they want to get as good a time as possible. And that's the same thing in the Christian life. So when we look at the world around us, there's a lot of things that may be good things, but they can distract us from what we want to accomplish. And so as Christians, as we seek the Lord, as we're moving forward in our Christian life, we want to lay those worldly cares, some of which we have to do, right? We have to have jobs, we have to take care of our families, we have to do all the things. We are members of this society. We have to do those things, but those should not be our priority. We should be focused on God, so we shouldn't let those things become a distraction or a weight that holds us down. So let's lay aside every weight and the sin, which does so easily beset us. So weights and sin. So sin can definitely be a distraction from following God, from moving forward in the Christian life. And let us run with patience the race that is set before us. I think this description of running is good. Running is different from other sports. In running, there are no points of celebration until you get to the end of the race. My high school, I'm involved in the athletic program variety race, so I watch a lot of high school football. If you watch high school football, and this continues in college football and NFL, the opening kickoff of the game, some guy, usually in high school, the special teams are not guys who get a lot of playing time, so they're really all about the kickoff, coming down, making the tackle. When they make that tackle, what do? They celebrate like they just won the Super Bowl, right? They are amped up, they're celebrated. That is different than the Christian life. That's different than running, right? At my school, we have a cross-country course, which I run in the fall, and they have every mile marked out. And I have a certain pace I want to keep. Now, when I get to the end of the first mile, if I've kept the pace I want to keep, do I stop and celebrate for a while that I made it? Because what would that do? Then I would be behind the rest of the time, right? And then if I stop and celebrate, so running a race is different because the only time you celebrate is when you get to the end. There are no midpoint celebrations in a race because you have to keep moving forward. Because if you stop, then you're behind, then you're distracted. So I think that's it's a good comparison to the actual Christian life, right? In the Christian life, we know there are there's moments where you're really feeling close to God, maybe God's been answering some prayers, and you stop and celebrate and you think, well, I'm really doing well now. What's going to happen? Temptation's going to come, you're probably going to stumble, right? Because you got comfortable, you got complacent. As a runner, you have to run with patience. The idea of running with patience is you just have to keep the pace. I think around New Year's, this can be a real temptation. We know in society and there's nothing wrong with New Year's resolutions. I think they can be very beneficial. But a lot of times, what's the busiest day at the gym? Like January 1st and 2nd, right? Everyone's made a New Year's resolution. They're going to go work out. They're going to, it's winter time. They haven't done much exercise. They're going to really turn it. And then what happens by like February 1st? It's back to the normal group, right? And that shouldn't be the Christian life, right? We can't have these, we're going to have a New Year's resolution, then we're just going to go back to the same old. The Christian life is always one of moving forward, trying to keep a constant pace. So we have to run with patience. And running is it is an exhausting sport because there's not those points of celebration. There's not a point where you can sit on the bench and recover, right? You can't take a break. You can't call a timeout in the middle of a race to regroup and catch up with the guy in front of you. It's always a constant grind, a constant moving. And that's what we have to do. We have to run with patience. And if you get impatient, if someone tries to, usually what you can see like a beginning runner, they don't know how to pace themselves. So you can see them starting off like a sprint, and then all of a sudden depending on the race they're running. If it's a mile, they do really well in the first lap, and the next 3 they're really dragging because they haven't learned to run with patience. They don't know how to discipline themselves. And the Christian life is not a 100-meter sprint. When I was running long distance, I was always slightly selfish of the sprint race because I thought that looks like a lot of fun. It's like 100 meters. You get to run really fast. People are impressed with your speed, and then you're done. I'm out here running the mile, and no one thinks that's cool. It's just an exhausting thing. But that's the Christian life. The Christian life's not a sprint. It's not how fast you can go. It's just staying patient and really running our own race. And when Todd has done a few little kid races, and I've tried to explain to him, it's not about who finishes first. It's about you. This race is about how you're doing, how you're making progress, not about am I ahead of the next person. It's about your race, and that's the Christian life. We're not looking around and saying, oh, we're ahead of that person, I need to catch that person. We're running our own race, and God has a unique plan for each of our lives. So we have to run with patience the race that is set before us. Unfortunately, in verse 2, we have the best example of all time. Verse 2 says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. So Jesus has already run his race, and he has endured things that we can never imagine the things that he had to endure, because, as I said, we each have our own race, and Jesus on this earth, we just celebrated his coming to earth, had his own unique race too, which had more difficulty and challenges than we will ever face. And yet, how did he run his race? With patience and endurance. And the wording is interesting, who for the joy that was set before him. And I think that's an interesting thing about running, is that there is such joy when you have reached the finish line. And it's even a biological thing. They talk about a runner's high when they reach the finish line. And so Christ endured incredible things. And we know that if we think about the Garden of Gethsemane, he even struggled as he faced those things. But yet, because of the joy, the finish line that was set before him, he endured the cross, he despised the shame, and is now, he has run his race. And he's now set down at the right hand of the throne of God. And because he did that, then we know that we can do the same thing. And so the rest of this passage that we're going to look at in verses 3 through 11 is about how then are we supposed to accomplish this. So we know we're supposed to run this race. We know we're supposed to follow God. So what does that look like in our lives? So verse 3, for consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your mind. So we're using Christ as an example, and he endured all these things at the hands of sinners, and we should be encouraged not to be wearied and faint in your minds. And once again, weariness is a sign of running hard. Being weary is a natural point in running, and there's always that it's the mind over matter. And when you're coaching kids, you want to try to teach them to understand you may feel tired, but you can still push on. You haven't reached your limit yet. And that's part of running, is realizing you're tired, but yet pushing the limits to what you can accomplish. And you don't want to faint in your mind. And it's interesting because the wording is faint in your mind, and that's where things start, right? Many times with a runner, it's not actually the body that's failing. They think it's the body, but it's really their mind that's failing. The mind is being tired. And we know that in our Christian life, with God being our strength, we're never failing. But we can think we can fail. And that can lead to us actually falling behind in the race. Verse 4 says that ye have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. So, in context, this is probably referring to the fact that these particular Christians had not dealt with martyrdom at this point. This was probably written, it's a little confusing who wrote this epistle. Some people think it's Paul. Most of Paul's epistle, he identifies himself as the writer. It may have been Paul. We don't know, but it seems in context that this was a time before Nero's persecution had come. So these people were not actually enduring bloody persecution. Well, that was something they didn't have to endure at this point. It may be coming. But they were enduring different types of temptation, different types of challenges, which also applies to us in our time. We are not dealing with martyrdom, but we are dealing in the United States with different challenges, and each of us have challenges in our own lives. Verse 5, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou rebuketh him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If you endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? Now this could be a very challenging verse, because I think in our minds we think of discipline, and you think of discipline as discipline for punishment. And that's certainly part of child rearing. But this encompasses all of child rearing, which a lot of it is, when you talk about disciplining a child, it's not necessarily punishment for sin or punishment for disobedience. It's about discipling them, about them understanding what it means to mature, what it means to become an adult, what it means to be responsible. So I think we should broaden this to not just refer to punishments, about discipling a child. And as parents, and I'm a young parent, so I have a long way to go on my parenting journey, but as parents, we are, a good parent is discipling their child, right? Yes, they're punishing for wrongdoing, but also they're helping them provide structure, provide support, to help them understand what it means to mature, to grow, to be responsible. And does the child embrace all of that? Do children naturally want to provide discipline and structure? Do they want all those things? No, a child left to his own ways is going to do what? Run wild, not pick up their toys, be chaotic, and the purpose of education is to disciple them, right? To lead them. And that's the same thing in the Lord in our lives. So when you look at this, I don't think we should, yes, the Lord punishes us for sin, but also He brings challenges into our lives to challenge us, to discipline us, to help us to focus on Him. And without those challenges, unfortunately, many of us would fail at being successful at running a Christian life. And so verse 5, as we look at this, it says, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord. If a child despises the discipline of their parents, that's not going to lead to a very productive place, right? And if we as Christians chafe against the Christian life, if we chafe against what God is doing in our lives, that will not lead us to be productive Christians. And it's interesting, verse 6, it says, for whom the Lord loveth, He chasteneth. For whom the Lord loveth, He disciplines. If we are God's child, we are going to endure discipline. We're going to endure challenges. And it's interesting, as when I watch as a coach and watching other coaches and other teams at my school, or now that Todd is playing some sports, kind of watching his practices, I don't want my son to be coached by a coach who just has fun. If I go watch a practice and they're just goofing around, the kids are doing what they want to. Now he's 6 years old, so I want him to have fun, but I also want the coach to be trying to develop, to provide structure, in a sense, discipline, right? I remember I was walking home. I think I played tennis at school, so I was walking home, and the football team was finishing their practice. And I don't know what happened, but I figure one of the guys had done something wrong, because he got to spend some extra time with the coach afterwards, in which he got to walk 5 yards, do some push-ups, walk 5 more yards, do some more push-ups. And I figured he had done something in practice that the coach had found to not be for the betterment of the team. And that was probably a good thing, right? That coach was telling that player, hey, I have expectations of you, and you're not meeting those expectations. And if the player went home and said, my coach hates me, he received the wrong message, right? I don't know who the player was. It was kind of dusky, so I couldn't see who the player was. But his coach was disciplining him because he wanted him to be better, right? And that's what God does. So when we see a coach who's making their players run or making them work hard, they are disciplining them. One of my favorite movies is The Miracle, about the Olympic hockey team in 1980. And if you watch the movie, Herb Brooks did a lot of disciplining of those players. I remember after a game they played, and they had not performed up to his expectations. So everyone else left, and they started doing skating from like blue line to the red line, and they were exhausted. And they thought, I think the assistant coaches thought Herb Brooks was crazy, but he was disciplining them for a reason. Of course, we know the result. They won the gold medal. But it wasn't that he hated his players. He wanted them to achieve their best. And that's the same thing in our Christian life. If we look at the challenges and the hardships that God brings into our lives and we hate it, and we don't have the right attitude, then that's going to hurt us. But discipline is part of what God does. My dad, as my track coach, his discipline for us was making us go run every day. If he said, "Oh, I really love you guys, so I don't want to make you run too much. I know it's hot, it's exhausting. We're just going to do once a week." Well, that would not have disciplined us to reach our goals, right? That would not have helped us be, not that we were the fastest runners, but as fast as we were, that would have helped us if he would have just given up and said, "Hey, I love you guys so much, I'm not going to give you any structure, any discipline." And that's the same thing as parents. If someone says, "I love my kids so much, I just can't discipline them. I just really love them to do what they want," that's not real love, right? And so that's how God is treating us. So when we look at this, we can look at it as negative. We see the word chastening in verse 6. We see scourging. But I think we should take it as God is disciplining us. He's making us, He's molding us into our image. And we don't naturally, as fallen humans, we don't naturally mold ourselves into God's image. So He has to discipline us to get us there. So in verse 7 it says, "If ye endure chastening, God deal with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if you be without chastening, but without chastisement, wherefore all are partakers, then ye are ye bastards and not sons." So this is comparing us to a father-son relationship. And a good father is going to discipline his son. But if a father doesn't discipline his son, if the father doesn't care to discipline his son, then he's not actually acting like he's a real son, right? So if a Christian can go about their life sinning, doing whatever they want, and they're not receiving any consequences from God, that probably means they're not actually God's son. Because God, as a good father, is a good father going to allow their child to fall into all sorts of sin and rebellion and all sorts of things? No, a good father is not going to allow him to do that. And is God a good father? Yes. So if we fall into sin, if we stumble into sin, we will not be comfortable. A Christian who is living a life of sin is not going to live a life of joy. They're going to have challenges. They're going to, and I think God will use that to bring them back to themselves, to bring them back to God Himself. That is a good thing. So when you're praying for someone who has fallen into sin, I think it's okay that you ask that God brings discipline into their life. That God uses the challenges of this world, the challenges of different situations in which they find themselves, to hopefully bring them back to God. And that's very important because God is a good father. So God is not going to allow His child to fall into sin and not work to bring him back. So that chastisement, those challenges are a good thing. Verse 9 talks about our own fathers. Verse 9 says, "Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh, which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but He for our profit, that we might be partakers of His holiness." So all of us have had fathers, and unfortunately, because we live on a fallen earth, many people have challenges with their fathers. There are fathers who are absent. Some people, unfortunately, grow up with fathers who have passed away. We know there's different challenges. So sometimes I think people, if they have like an abusive father, they look at then God the Father and think, well, my dad was this way and he's God the Father, so maybe he's the same way. And that can be a real challenge for people to overcome. So I think it's important that we understand that God is a good father. And He's better, even people who have great dads, God is better than that. And we know that for a time, we had fathers of our flesh. So all of us had fathers, unless there was an absence. And they corrected us, verse 9, and we gave them reverence. So our dads corrected us, we gave them reverence. And if we gave our earthly fathers, our earthly dads reverence, shouldn't we much more give God the Father reverence? And we should. He is perfect. No matter the best dad in the world, our dad's perfect. No, we all have follies and foibles and fail in some way, and yet our children are commanded to do what? Give us reverence. So we have a perfect Father, and if we have a perfect Father, then we should be giving Him reverence. and we should be in subjection unto the Father of spirits, and we will live. And so we are going to be partakers of God's holiness. Verse 11. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. And I think once again, if we think about athletes and really any sport, the conditioning stage of athletics is hard, right? It's, like it says here, now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous. In other words, when you're going through, whether it's running or any sport you're playing, the conditioning aspects of it are hard. Even if you look up, like what football teams do in training camps, all those things, they're challenging. They're challenging both mentally and physically. So why do athletes endure that? Why do they go out, maybe in the heat of the summer, why do they do all those things? Because they want to go win the game. They want to receive, in a sense, the glory, right? They want that, whatever level, whatever sport they're playing, they want the satisfaction of scoring a goal, scoring a touchdown, winning the race. They want that, and they know in order to get that, they have to endure something. If you have an athlete who's never endured anything, probably they're not a very high-level athlete because they haven't gone through those challenges. And the Christian life is the same way. We have to endure. And what is the reason for our endurance? What's the end game for us? Peaceful fruit of righteousness, right? We will get to endure. We endure for a time because we know that our time on this earth in light of humanity is very short. So we have to endure the challenges of this life, the challenges of being a fallen human being in a very fallen world. We have to endure that for a time, but we know that in due course we will celebrate and we will receive the peaceful fruit of righteousness. So as we finish, I want to finish in 2 Timothy. Now, like I said, we don't know the author of Hebrews, but we do know the author of 2 Timothy, and that was Paul. And 2 Timothy is regarded as Paul's final book that he wrote. Of the many books he wrote, many, but 2 Timothy is the final one. And as he was writing this is near the end of his life. So persecution had come, and he knows that his life is nearing an end. And he is kind of reflecting on his life as he's looking back at the race that he has run. And but before I read the verse about Paul, I want to focus on someone who didn't finish the race, and that's 2 Timothy 4, verse 10. And it says, "For Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, and is departed unto Thessalonica." So Demas had been running the race, right? He is mentioned actually in some of other of Paul's books that Demas was with him. But what had Demas gotten distracted by? The world. And he had been weighed down by the world, and he loved the present world too much. He was unwilling to endure the challenges of this life because he found the world exciting. We don't know what exactly distracted him, but he didn't finish his race. He got distracted, and he forsook Paul. And you think about it, it would be incredible to be Paul's sidekick, right? I mean, what an advantage to have to not just have what Paul wrote, but be able to converse with him every day. And Demas found the world to be too exciting to want to spend time with Paul, to of course want to follow Christ. So he forsook him, so he didn't run his race with endurance. But now let's look back at what Paul writes. And we'll begin reading in verse 5 to get a little bit of context. Verse 5, "But watch thou," he's writing to Timothy, "but watch thou in all things, endure affliction, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight, I have finished my course, I have kept the faith." So he's making some comparisons here, once again, to athletics, right? He talks about fighting a good fight. And boxing, of course, wrestling, he can be alluding to here. But I'm going to focus on that second phrase, "I have finished my course." Paul knew that he was nearing the end of his race, right? He was nearing the end. And notice the wording, he has finished his course. Paul's course is going to be different than Timothy's course, which is different than Silas's course, which is different than our course, right? But Paul was finishing his course. And the wording that he uses is really interesting because it says, I have kept the faith. And you know what he didn't say? He didn't say how many people he had run to the Lord, how many churches he had planted. He didn't talk about any of those accomplishments, right? What was his focus? He had kept the faith. And I think sometimes we can compare ourselves to Paul or whoever else. We think, well, I didn't accomplish what Paul did, or I didn't accomplish what this pastor did, or I didn't what this famous missionary did. But that's not really what matters at the end of life, right? What mattered to Paul is he had kept the faith. He had finished his course. And what is the result of finishing the course? What's the result of keeping the faith? Verse 8 says, Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord the righteous judge shall give me at that day. And not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. So what is Paul saying? Because he had finished his course, he is going to receive a crown of righteousness. Now, he was prior alluding to the Olympic Games, or if you won in the Olympic Games, you received a wreath of olive branch leaf. And that was what the winner received, and that's what Paul was alluding to, that crown of righteousness. But what would happen to that Olympic medalist? We would use the word medalist today, but the Olympic champion, what would happen to his wreath around his head, his crown? It would dry out. It would wither. Even today, people who win the gold, we know the Olympic Games are coming up in February. Those who win the gold medals, will those medals last forever? I mean, a medal's lasting longer than a wreath, but when time and eternity does an Olympic medal, we won't probably even remember that person's name 8 years later, right? They go, they come, they win, they are champions, and then they move on, we move on, there'll be another champion in 4 years. And the most encouraging thing about that is Paul says, shall give me at that day. But that crown of righteousness is not just for an apostle, right? It's for not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. So that crown of righteousness is not just for Paul, it's not just for apostles, it's for all of us. All of us who keep the faith and and look for God's appearing. And that's what we should do. So as we look at this new year coming, as we look at our Christian life, we should just run the race. And I think it's easy to get caught up in moments, and are we winning championships? Are we accomplishing great things for God? And yes, we should be accomplishing things for God, but the most important thing is that we're running the race that God has given us. And there are going to be discouragements, there's going to be challenges, but we have a good God, and we have a good Father. And He is going to help us. And we have Jesus who has already gone ahead and finished the race, and now He will help us finish our race. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank You for this passage. We thank You for this coming year. And we pray that we would be faithful. We would be like Paul. We would keep our faith. And You will give us the strength to keep our faith. We thank You for this time together. In Jesus' name.